Okay, I am returning back to Alberto Martinez's excellent book on the lost origins of Einstein's relativity, Kinematics. Now, I had already read chapter 6 because it's free online, and that's the best chapter or the most important chapter. I encourage people to read chapter 6 for free. And he's emphasizing that Einstein focused on the motion of matter as the foundation of debunking simultaneity at the speed of light. And Einstein was greatly influenced by Poincaré and Lorentz and Ernst Mach and David Hume, the philosopher. And the key point was that, as I mentioned before, when you study electromagnetics, there's a discovery that, and I was not really aware of this, but there's an asymmetric empirical difference between the magnetic and electromotive force. He goes into that in chapter 6. So I'm not gonna review the details, but the last video I did a short video mentioning Newman being the first to debunk Newton. And so you can see in this, right where I'm reading now, that Newman is mentioned again in the middle of the page there as debunking Newton, and as even though Einstein didn't read Newman directly, that was a direct lineage, a provenance of Einstein's relativity, because Newman was the first to realize that Newton was wrong and that you have some sort of relativistic inertial system. But Newman was trying to, get around that in 1870. So it took several decades for Lorentz and Poincaré and Mach to all analyze this debunking of Newton and then realize, no, actually, then it was Einstein, of course, who said, no, that space-time actually is different based on the observations of the motion of matter at the speed of light, or approaching the speed of light. Now, what I'm interested in is the fact that you're not limited to observing, to an external observation when you study the definition of time in relation to motion. And that's what kinematics really is. It's the study of time and motion, but kinematics is limited to external observation of matter. But if you rely on light itself through biology, then you can turn the light around, and then you can, instead of observing, you can then listen to the source of the light as pure time, as logical inference. And that's what meditation is. And obviously, it sounds it sounds hokey as Westerners, because Westerners were interested in power, power being the energy over time. So you have charge and amps and watts and joules. So the joules would be the energy and the watts would be over time, or amps. But the source of the charge itself is from this nonlocal logical inference as motion of time. And this is what Einstein could never believe. He called it spooky action at a distance that enabled telepathy. And my point is that, well, I wasn't the first one to point this out, but Olivier Coster de Beauregard was the first to realize that in fact that's the truth, that there is telepathy as the paranormal or spiritual, as the truth of reality. And recently Sir Roger Penrose has made the same claim, that the truth of reality is actually precognition as protoconsciousness, what he calls protoconsciousness. So you have this information that is a negative entropy or negentropy because it's quantum nonlocality, meaning it's faster than the speed of light, and it's a instantaneous action at a distance that cannot be directly observed due to the 1/2 spin origin of charge from the electron. And so another way to say 1/2 spin is the 720 degree. So as I show that, you have to twist your hand upside down and then bring it back. And if you did that without spilling anything, so you take a cup and you go twist it around, and then you twist your hand upside down. Notice the cup stays upright, and then you bring it back around, and then your hand is back to where it was, and you've never spilled anything. But in the meantime, you have twisted your hand upside down like that. See? And if you did that with your whole arm, that would demonstrate it even more. But the idea is that at every 0 point of space-time, you have that twist happening as a fifth dimension, but that dimension is actually pure time. It's not a spatial dimension, it's an instantaneous. It's what we externally perceive as being instantaneous, but it's actually the future and the past overlapping as faster than the speed of light, and therefore it cannot be directly observed. But it can be listened to through meditation. It can be logically observed. And this is something I discussed with Brian Josephson. He pointed out that Jack Sarfati does not understand attention. And by attention, he meant this. Brian Josephson meant this listening process in meditation that they call it super radiance in based on the 1/2 spin in the transcendental meditation that Brian Josephson used to be a part of, but he told me that he practices Qigong now at Cambridge. And so Brian Josephson considers biology as information active, what Basil J. Hiley calls active information to be more fundamental than physics. And so that's why it sounds hokey to talk about listening as logical inference. Because as Westerners were obsessed with observing matter externally for power. And now, so if you have this wrong logical foundation to create Western science based on external measurements for power, then you end up increasing entropy by trying to decrease the entropy of matter through these external observations. You are then increasing gravitational entropy because, as Roger Penrose points out, the gravitational negentropy or the gravitational potential energy in relativity, what in electrodynamics or electromagnetic theory would have been called a potential charge or potential energy, is now in relativity it's gravitational potential energy. But Roger Penrose is making the claim that that's actually what physics calls dark energy, is actually gravitational potential energy based on this negative frequency and time reversed non-commutative protoconsciousness or precognitive active information as a quantum negative entropy, quantum negentropy. So, this is what exists after a black hole dissipates from Hawking radiation at the end of the universe. So, but as Roger Penrose points out, there's no space. There's absolutely no dimension of space left. It's just pure time and frequency. And so because it's pure time and frequency, it already exists and it continues to exist. Even, it existed before the universe physically existed as matter. So it's just like photons, as you can have virtual photons that are negative frequency and a time reverse signal. So in standard physics, the virtual photons are just considered a mathematical trick called renormalization. But because of essentially the relativity of time being asymmetric, then you have a non-commutative nonlocality as the foundation of reality, which would be this non-commutative time and frequency that Alan Kahn and Basil J. Hiley focus on, and also Lou Kaufman, who worked with Eddie Oceans. And it was Eddie Oceans who realized that this is the secret of non-Western meditation as Neigong, or internal martial arts, is the non-commutativity as a mind-body unification. So you're doing certain exercises that they call Neigong or Qigong or Tai Chi or Wing Chun or Bagua or Yiquan. There's thousands of different types of Qigong. So, but the secret underlying unification, it's also found in India as the Three Gunas. So it's the oldest philosophy of India is the Three Gunas, and I was actually discussing this with a guy from South India, because he was talking about the Dravidian Tamil tradition of alchemy, which is very much the same as Taoist yoga alchemy, but it's the older Dravidian Tamil South Indian yoga tradition, where they discuss what in Qigong is called Bigu, which is the energy feasting that Trinity Lin did when he went 28 days. And Robert Peng did it when he went 100 days. But there's a man in India who was tested for in a hospital closed setting, and this guy on YouTube was comparing him to the older Tamil alchemy tradition and saying that the texts on the training describe the exact same phenomenon of this fluid that's created from in the roof of the mouth from the brain. It comes down through the sinus cavity, and this is the cerebrospinal fluid that is called amrita in the South Indian alchemy tradition. And so this guy that had been tested in a hospital where they tested all his vital conditions and his nutrition levels and proved that, he was still fine, because he claimed he has not eaten any food, or I'm not even sure if he drank water. He said he might have even gone without water. I'm not sure, but he said his secret was that he would look at the sun. He would do solar gazing, and then this would create this flowing of a fluid from the top of his mouth that he would then swallow, and that's how he got his nutrition. And now the thing about the solar gazing in the yoga tradition is that you're absorbing the negentropy of the sun directly, and then in your third eye you see the whole rainbow spectrum, and it's the blue light in the center that then activates this super radiance in the brain through the microtubules in the tubulin. And there was recently a new YouTube video by this science YouTuber named Anton, and I think he's Portuguese maybe, or he could be Brazilian. Anyway, he said he finally realized that Roger Penrose and Stuart Hamroff have been corroborated, because there's been another study about the proving super radiance of the microtubules with the tubulin using ultraviolet light. And by super radiance, they mean a quantum coherence that's superluminal. And so Roger Penrose calls this negative resonance. And by negative resonance, he means that the EEG of the brain that gets normally read based on the 4 states of awareness, the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Well, in Indian yoga, there's a 4th state they call Turiya, which is beyond the deep sleep state, meaning that you can logically infer this pure information, because you still exist during your deep dreamless sleep, even though you perceive no space-time and no perceptions, no observations. And by taking that state of awareness seriously, then you can logically investigate it, and that's called vichara in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, by just realizing that your ego, your psychological ego, is based on your sense of I, of individuality, the I thought. is the foundation of all your other thoughts. And so you can literally just repeat the I thought over and over and over. And then eventually you'll start seeing light. And you visualize that light on the right side of your heart. And I discussed this in my free training manual. That's my oldest video upload. And so, as the paper by Gerard de Hooft and Martin van der Mark explains, all matter is actually made of light due to the 1/2 spin of quantum nonlocality. And this was first realized by Louis de Broglie when he was critiquing relativity in terms of quantum physics. And Einstein got Louis de Broglie his PhD because nobody else could understand it. So they sent it off to Einstein, and Einstein said, yeah, Louis de Broglie makes sense. It's a good PhD. But then when Louis de Broglie came up with his law of phase harmony, Einstein said, it's too simple. It can't be this simple. So if it's this simple, it can't be true. Einstein was in denial because we tend to psychologically cling to this need to have an external observation of matter to listen to it. So, for example, Einstein's favorite musician was Mozart. But if you listen to Glenn Gould, he's most famous for performing Bach. And there's a documentary featuring Glenn Gould, and he says that he considers Mozart to be too programmatic. In other words, the music is sort of predictable. It's the same type of cliches in the melodic phrasing that Mozart uses over and over, and it's sort of like a cheat sheet, like a jazz musician uses a cheat sheet where they have certain number of licks that they rely on, for their performance, and that's basically what Mozart was doing. And you can definitely hear that if you listen to Mozart. You'll hear the same type of melodic riffs or licks, over and over in all of his music. And so, of course, it works. It works if you're relying on this equal temper tuning. And recently they have the AI music, the artificial intelligence music. But equal temper tuning is the same as AI. And the equal temper tuning was the basis for the commutative geometry from the Pythagorean theorem. Something I've gone into before, but you can extend that all the way up to Einstein, and basically you can derive artificial intelligence from this commutative geometry. But Roger Penrose is pointing out that because of the Gödel incompleteness theorem, you can't really have AI. That protoconsciousness is inherently free will. It's what Stuart Hameroff explains in his article, his most read science articles on the quantum origin of free will from this, what Roger Penrose again calls negative resonance. So it gets into very abstract stuff, but when we look at the ecological crisis, we realize if you study global warming, there's a recent article in Physics Today on the thermodynamics of the climate. And the article points out that most scientists, and the big error about global warming is to limit the thermodynamics to matter when in fact it's based on photons. When you realize it's based on the photons, then you realize that the entropy is due to the change in the frequency from the the solar light coming into Earth that gets converted into a lower frequency as infrared light, and then that's what's interacting with the CO2 molecules and water molecules and some of the other molecules that get used in technology. And so when you realize that it's actually based on photosynthesis as the true origin of power for energy on Earth, then you also realize that the algae is by far the most efficient photosynthesis as negative entropy as life on Earth, and algae is the oldest life form on Earth. So it makes sense that as primary production, it would have the most efficient form of energy. It's 4.6 billion years old, and so oil and coal actually both come from algae, mainly algae. And so now you have like Sir David King at Cambridge, and then Raphael Jovine, who has a double PhD in marine biology, and they both realize that only algae can reverse the ecological crisis that is actually an increase in gravitational entropy as defined by the photon entropy. As Roger Penrose explains, the entropy of matter is the opposite of the entropy of gravity, of gravitational entropy, that originates from this quantum negentropy. The potential gravity is actually quantum negentropy. So then you end up having this like holographic space-time vortex on Earth, what I call the cosmic rainbow vortex on Earth as the ecological crisis. And this is also the claim made by Daniel Pinchbeck, who says that our ecological crisis is actually like this shamanic awakening for the whole planet, for humans, that will have to go through this species extinction to realize that, the truth of reality is this deeper thing. But of course that doesn't justify what science is doing to life on Earth. And so that's why I've been advocating what Sir David King is working on and promoting, which is the fertilization of the deep oceans with volcanic ash that's being mixed with rice hulls from Goa, India, and they're using a binder, standard binder. I can't remember if it's like gluten or something, I don't know, but and then they spread this to mimic the whale feces that would normally be in the deep oceans. And then they might need to use passive ocean pumps to then mimic the type of water circulation that the whales would create also from diving up and down. And that fertilization would then cause agricultural regeneration of the oceans, of the deep oceans. And that could sequester 30 gigatons per year of CO2 through the increased growth of algae, the algae blooms in the deep ocean that would then get eaten by krill. And because of the increase in the krill population, then the whale population would rebound back to its previous numbers that existed before the humans slaughtered the whales for whale oil, for power from matter. And then there's also Raphael Jovine, who's been advocating the near ocean algae farms, which he says that he's plotted out their locations that would be in the desert, where he could mummify the algae to sequester the carbon. And he says if he gets funding and support, then his company Brilliant Planet could then sequester 10 gigatons per year of algae. So right there you'd have 40 gigatons of CO2 sequestered per year, which is almost as much as the global annual output of CO2. And then you can also use the macroalgae of seaweed that's now being sold out of Australia as a supplement to ungulates that create methane when they digest food. And if you add the algae into their diet, it's been proven to neutralize the methane. And then you can also use the algae to capture the carbon from the coal burning plants. And the algae can also be used as biofuel and also as fertilization, as natural fertilizer. And then you can also eat the algae. So essentially, algae would replace civilization. Now, if we don't do this because of our obsession with progress and technology of matter through this commutative geometry system that was first established in Platonic philosophy and then ended with the Einstein's relativity, which is still the focus of science today with astronomy, astrophysics. Then we will increase the gravitational entropy on Earth as an ecological crisis, probably leading to nuclear radiation increasing on Earth, and then that would destroy the ozone layer. As a conservation biology professor, Guy McPherson has explained, or his name's also pronounced Guy, and so eventually life would recover on Earth, and it would start recovering as algae. So one way or the other, the future of life on Earth is algae. And that's due to, again, the photosynthesis being based on quantum entanglement as nonlocality. The nonlocality is the energy of negative entropy. And this was first published in the public in 1945 by Schrodinger's book, in his book, What is Life? But it was actually first realized by Pascual Jordan in the 1930s. And he realized that the secret of the negentropy of life is noncommutativity, non-commutative of the transitional frequencies that Heisenberg had discovered. And it was actually Pascual Jordan he was one of the students of Maxwell Born, who was tasked with doing the non-commutative matrices mathematics that Born developed. I think it actually was developed by Pascual Jordan, because his other student refused to do it. The guy, Wolfgang Pauli, I think Wolfgang Pauli refused to do it, but then Wolfgang Pauli discovered spin, and that also is non-commutative, the 1/2 spin of the electron is the smallest particle, being actually, so basically they say it's actually like trapped light. The electron is trapped light of the negative frequency of light. from the future. And so what's fascinating about kinematics, to get back to this book, is that physicists had to admit that they could not really measure simultaneity. Simultaneity in that time was this false construct as an external measurement that creates a paradox in between mathematics and physics. And of course, if you take the logic seriously, you'll notice this right away when you're learning the Pythagorean theorem. And that's something I realized when I was in high school. I never believed in the Pythagorean theorem, which is total blasphemy if you say that nowadays, because the Pythagorean theorem is the foundation of modern science. But if you realize it's secretly based on music theory, as I've explained, then you realize the music theory is actually non-commutative. Then you realize that the Pythagorean theorem was actually a logical lie that covered up this asymmetric time that's coherent as energy, because it's non-local. And so Basil J. Halley, physics professor Basil J. Halley's big point is that because it's non-commutative, it's not limited to the quantum scale, so you don't have to worry about the quantum measurement problem with the collapse of the wave function. And the non-commutative negative entropy can then self-amplify into the macro scale. And this is what Pascual Jordan first argued also in the 1930s. The problem is that his political views were wrong, were abhorrent, and so his science got well, he actually tried to defend his other physicists that were being targeted for bad the political situation. And so Basil J. Halley is continuing his non-commutative research, as is Roger Penrose. But they get ignored because Penrose is in his 90s and Basil J. Halley is in his 80s. But the thing is that, as I mentioned, this young guy, Anton, who has a YouTube channel, he discovered, there's this recent super radiance experiment. In fact, there was Anirban Banyopahe recently published a paper on super radiance that he proved. He was the first one to prove the super radiance of the microtubules and the tubulin as a negative refractive index in the neurons. So his research has just been corroborated by this more recent study out of Howard University with some other physicists from a couple other locations. So I haven't finished this book. I'm just glancing at the final couple chapters. As you can see, it gets a lot more abstract. It's a slow read. But this is essentially what non-commutativity is right here. I don't think he gets into non-commutativity at all. He just says it's asymmetric. And so he probably doesn't mention Louis de Broglie either, because the book is about Einstein. But as you can see, you have this these basic concepts of distance and direction, when you combine direction with distance as velocity, then you end up getting this relativistic, non-commutative secret that Einstein, he discovered it in terms of the external observation of matter, but he was disproven about his what he realized was the logic of quantum physics. But he was against the statistical foundation of reality, but noncommutativity does not rely on statistics because it just relies on the negative frequency and time reversed non-locality directly. What Alain Kahn just calls 2-3 infinity from music theory. And he says that music theory is the simplest way to understand the non-commutativity. So again, you got to go back to the very basic concepts that science originated in from music theory and time and frequency, and then you realize that the ancient Pythagoreans were actually correct, that the orthodox Pythagorean philosophy has been misunderstood ever since Philolaus and Archytas and Plato, and then that misunderstanding just kept accumulating until Einstein realized that it creates a serious paradox that proves the relativity of space-time itself. But what Einstein could not accept was what the Bell's inequality experiments have now proven, leading to the Nobel Prize a few years ago, that quantum non-locality is exactly what Einstein feared it would be, which is this spooky action at a distance. And if you study Professor Jean Bremont, who basically is relying on Louis de Broglie's work with updated by David Bohm and Basil J. Hiley, that indeed spooky action at a distance does exist.